So right now we're going to talk about real estate wholesaling. We're going to see and have an overview what's the difference between real estate wholesaling transactions compared to retail. Now, what is wholesaling? If you already have an idea, you can skip, but I just want to um, recap what wholesaling is. Wholesaling basically is that a wholesaler, a real estate wholesaler, will find discounted properties, and usually he will find discounted properties from these kinds of lead lists. Why am I listing these out? Because you have to ready yourself to encounter these types of transactions. Those that have tax liens, those are pre-foreclosures, short sales, ugly houses, those with out-of-state owners, which they call vacants, those they bought from auctions, and probates. So these have different kinds of twist depending on where you got the property from. An example for tax liens, I guess you already know that you would have to um, call the county for that. Well, that at least that's what I did for my clients before. For short sales, because I was an assistant, I didn't know with TCing, but with short sales, it's very much lots of back and forth with the bank to uh, get the short sale approved. And then these basically are just the same ugly houses. So that means tons of, they usually buy as is, so no problem. But there are very seldom instances where you get a retail and buyer. I mean, when I say retail and buyer, a buyer that is actually not an investor. He or she is just buying the property, um, discounted property, so that he or she can reside on that house. So that might be tons of inspections involved there. Out of state owners, auctions, probates. Um, this is tricky because sometimes someone has to be the official executor before the property can be sold. And then um, wholesaler. So this is sort of what happens. The wholesaler finds a motivated seller that's selling the property for a discount, and there will be a contract between the wholesaler and the seller. So usually, the usual setup is that very common practice. The seller doesn't know that the wholesaler is not an actual cash buyer. The seller assumes, based on the contract, that the wholesaler can close on the property, because really in the contract it says there that uh, I will buy this property for you in cash in what 14 days we can close. Now the wholesaler, once he has a contract with the seller, that's what we call A to B contract, he will find an end buyer and then put his profit, sell it for a bigger price, and then have a B to C contract. In some states, it will be discussed later on this presentation. You have to disclose to the buyer that you're assigning the contract. You're selling your equitable interest and not the property itself. But there are states that don't require that, so it's fine. Meaning, the buyer doesn't know how much you're getting. How much the wholesaler is getting out of that transaction as a profit. There are instances, though, which will be discussed later on, where they use assignment contracts. Anyway, the buyers are usually, you will encounter landlords, buy and hold investors, and rehabbers, because there are also wholesalers who are actually buyers themselves. They do wholesale, but there are properties that they have the money already, that they can close on properties for buy and hold or for renovating and reselling. So just wanted to mention that. But if the wholesaler is just a beginning wholesaler and doesn't have the actual cash, you will find these buyers. These are the usual types of contracts, assignment contracts, where it really says there that it stipulates in the contract that the seller will agree that the contract is assignable. So there's sort of a verbiage there that says um, you are selling this. The buyer is, example, Cheryl, Jane, and or assignee. Okay, and then ABC contracts is what I've mentioned earlier in my example, where it's discrete. You're treating both A to B and B to C as separate transactions. So um, the seller doesn't know that you are actually finding an end buyer, and the buyer doesn't know how much you're getting. So that's it. What to watch out for? Okay, not all title companies accept wholesaling files. Not all accommodate double closings. So your client needs to find a title company that is investor friendly. It's quite really, this one is challenging part. I mean, I don't know how many title companies my client have contacted last year just to get the right one because we lost money. And I'm going to reiterate how we lost money in those deals because of title company problems. So this one actually, you need to treat A to B and B to C transactions as separate transactions. What I mean when I say that is when you copy parties, if it's A to B, like wholesaler to seller, copy them only. Make sure that the contracts for A to B and B to C are not, you know, copied in all parties, because just like in example, what happened to one of our deals, our B2C contract was sent out. I mean, our A to B and B to C contracts were copied to all sides of the transaction, the seller and the buyer. So the buyer knew how much a profit the broker investor was getting. So he wanted to cut out the investor, and he contacted the seller. Now, the thing is, the seller knew, then find out how much um, profit the broker investor was getting. So he gave us a hard time. He wanted us to pay all the closing cost, all the utilities. Uh, for short, we lost $16,000 on that deal because um, the contracts, both A to B and B to C, were copied to all parties. So when you were trying to resolve something with the B to C contracts, the wholesaler to the end buyer, just copy the wholesaler and end buyer and whoever the title company. Same here. And sometimes you have to proactively inform the title company rep who's holding your file about that. That's what we did right after that experience. We just informed the title company that they had to be discreet because we lost money because of that, event. So they're pretty okay with it. They're open-minded as long as um, you give them, you know, a heads up about that. And then what to watch out for? Some states, I've already mentioned this, some states like Texas, if you're not licensed and you're wholesaling, you have to inform the buyer that you're only selling the equitable interest, and I think you should be using an assignment contract. But if you're licensed in Texas, it's okay, you can double close. But if no license, you cannot double close. It's not allowed. You can only use assignment contract. Common practices as is. So there are actually usually no home inspections because you're selling the property as is. But there are many investors who require 1 day inspection just so they can search for structural damage. So because a lot of them close the contracts over the phone, like sight unseen. And they want to secure the contract when they call someone, they give an offer, they have that person sign the purchase contract. So that's why they have this 1 day inspection. So, just to verify if there's no foundation issues or structural damages that will probably lead to not finding an end buyer for the property. Cash deals. So usually there's no financing contingency because usually they're buying in cash or private money. Transactional funding. Before, when I was still starting, they can do back to back close where the wholesaler can use the money for the B2C contract to pay for the A to B. But things have changed. It's now more regulated. So that's why there's transactional funding. So there are hard money lenders who are willing to give those wholesalers that don't have actual cash. They're going to lend them money so that they can bring cash for A to B. And it has to be simultaneous closing. So right when they close, A to B within that day, immediately as soon as possible, it should close with B to C. So that, and then what the wholesaler will do is that once B to C is closed, he will then pay back the money to the hard money lender. And then contract extensions is very common. Closing dates are usually moved because remember, you're accommodating A to B. I mean, B to C. So there are some end buyers who cannot close or need more time because they're also depending on their hard money lender or private money lender. And if it's set to close, let's say um, January 15th, that might need tons of addendums and extensions because they need more time. And if you do that, then you would have to extend your A to B as well. So that's a tricky part here. It's very common. So anything that happens to B to C, then you would have to extend to A to B and vice versa. If something happens in between in A to B, whatever it is, you're not going to close it. Even if your buyer is ready to close, you would have to move that. That happened in one of our deals where it's an asset manager who handles those properties. It's a bundle. And the thing is, they have their sort of, I don't know if that's their president who needs to sign, and the buyer is ready to close, but it's the A to B that keeps extending because they couldn't get the signatures for um, sort of the president. And that actually fell through because the end buyer lender, um, because it was COVID, th- the lender changed the requirements have been more strict, and the buyer couldn't get the funding anymore. So that was a sad, sad deal. Anyway, that's it. That's If you have questions, just let me know. But basically, that's it. Wholesaling is actually easier because there are less contingencies. It's straightforward. It closes easily. Plus, really, they get tons of deals as well. Especially if you're with a seasoned investor or wholesaler, it will bring tons of transactions. It's just here that you wanna. These are the things that you will be watching out for: the contract extensions and making sure that if it's not an assignment contract, but A to B and B to C are treated as separate transactions. All right. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.